There we go. So I've got gendered walk examples, just the first pose here, which I'm going to talk about the differences in these postures, and then maybe put in the first couple steps here, just as an example. So the big differences between the male and female posture is mostly going to be in the core of the body and the torso. How much bend and what kind of bend is generally going to be the difference. In the female body, when you walk, you're generally going to have more side to side bending and less motion in the upper body, and the hips are going to be the thing that moves around more. Okay, so what that means is that as you take your step, you're going to get more of a high hip on the supporting side, and then you're going to have more bend in the body to counter that motion so that the shoulders stay relatively stable. The reason for that should be somewhat obvious, but women have boobs and they don't want them swaying around like crazy because that hurts or is uncomfortable or embarrassing. So they tend to hold their upper body more stationary, and that requires that you move your hips around a lot more in order to achieve that. Okay. Over on the male side, men tend to have less side-to-side bend and more rotation. So, grab the wrong ring. You'll see shoulders rotating more for guys, and so consequently you have more hip rotation for guys as well, but a lot less side-to-side bending. Okay? And that just tends to be a characteristic difference. There's not really a reason for that. That's just something they do. Maybe it's slightly more comfortable gait. I don't know. Guys tend to be slightly more athletic in general, but not as a rule. So there's that. Forward to backward bend is also an issue, where with guys you'll see less bending this way in particular. Feminine torsos tend to have more backward bend just as a general rule, even by default. So this position should be more backward bent just a little bit, which either sticks the butt out or sticks the chest out, either one, depending. A little bit more forward lean on the male body as well. So we'll tend to have slightly worse posture with a more forward neck, and women will tend to be just a little bit more upright in their walking. We have,
Okay, now I'm glad you're recording this because this is actually good information to know.
yeah, well, hopefully it is. Guys will tend to keep their arms further away from their body just a little bit. This could be attributed to the amount of rotation in the shoulders, kind of, giving a little pull away from the body as the things are accelerating around. But really, it's just kind of a byproduct of the way that they walk. Slightly more separate legs as well for obvious reasons. We've got genitals on the male that get in the way and not on the female. So on the female side, what you can do is make the opposite happen. Put the feet more on a line as if you're walking on a tightrope. Tends to help. Keep the arms closer to the sides of the body. Again, they have to clear the hips and be able to be free to move, but you don't want the elbows in particular aiming outward on the female body. Try to aim them inward. If you want to go for especially feminine, you can also flip the wrists more upward, and that tends to make it look a little bit more female as well. Whereas on the guy, just kind of keep them neutral. If you tuck them in, it looks really weird, but I would just keep them more stiff and straight. Okay. I'm trying to think if there were any other general differences. I will just say in terms of personality, this doesn't really have to do with physiology, but personality-wise, you can have a female head angled more upward, so more like nice etiquette kind of posture, and a male head angled more downward towards the ground or towards the distance. That tends to just kind of be a behavioral thing, not really having to do with how men and women's bodies are shaped. Okay, cool. So those are just some broad differences in the way that you might pose. In general, no matter what the action is, if you're going for feminine, then try to keep the arms and legs closer to the body, and try to bend the body a little bit more. And for males, keep the arms and legs a little bit further away from the body. And don't bend the body as much unless it's something athletic. And then do. Okay. Do you guys want to see creating the first couple contact poses and then getting them to walk on the spot? That's something I can do.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Okay. Let's do the male one first because that's the easier of the two. So I've got this first pose here on frame 10. I've actually got it the T pose on frame 1 just to show the process of getting these into their positions. Something that you're going to have to think about eventually is that when you have an object that starts in one place and then goes to another, you want your controller to take the shortest route to that place so that it doesn't flip. So looking at this wrist that I've just selected here, it's held outward and away from his body. And then as it gets into position, it folds downward and rotates forward. But it's possible to get to this exact same position in other ways. And if you do that, you might mess up the way that the rig moves. So I'm going to go back just one frame and hit S here. And then we start at 0. Oh, we do start at 0. That's good. So I'm just going to 0 out everything. And I'm going to try to get back into that pose, but I'm going to try to take a stupid route to get there. So I'm going to rotate forward first, then this way, and see if that makes a difference about how we get to this position. So it was something like that, I think. A little bit lower. Without doing it like incredibly wrong, trying to get a slight gimbal lock problem. Let's see. So not really. It's kind of still just going directly. I could introduce a problem just by like rotating 360 this way. So there we go. Now we've got a gimbal lock problem. This is something that might come up in your animation posing. So just so you know, there's an easy way to fix that even if you end up with it, but you need to open the animation graph editor to fix it. So in the graph editor, if you see something like this happening on a rotation channel or several rotation channels where it goes out and then suddenly flips to the opposite side of 0, you've got a gimbal lock problem. Okay, so this is pretty easy to fix. Generally, you just grab the keys that are flipping like that and then go to Curves, Euler Filter. What this will do is try to get the exact same ending position, but it will subtract or add 360 to the line so that they're not flipping. So let's see. So that's what we end up with if I click the Euler filter. Now these keys are much closer to the ending values. And now if I play this back again, it's going directly. So just so you're aware.
Thank you.
That's something to handle before you start polishing animation curves, by the way. All right, let's go ahead and pose the other side of this contact then. I'm going to turn off the female controls so that they're not in the way. Grab all of these, and I'm going to go to frame. Let's see, I'm at 24 frames per second right now. I didn't even set this file up for animation yet, so I really should do that now. I'm going to go to the little running man. Make sure that keys at current frames is turned on, and change this to 30 frames per second. That we're set to playback at 1x speed. I'm going to hit save. So now I know I've got 30 frames for one cycle, because that would be march time. So our next pose should be 15 frames after this one, which is going to be 25. That will be our second step. I'm going to key at that position. And let me just check the hips that I didn't move them forward. Nope, I left them at 0, so that's good, because we're going to have to offset that. So I'm going to try to make the other contact pose. The front foot is going to end up looking like the back foot, but it's not going to change its position. So I'm going to eliminate its heel roll, give it some ball roll, like that, and then move the hips and arms forward, and the knees. Yeah, with the knees too. Okay, so trying to get the same kind of bend in the leg that I had in this pose, which is almost vertical thigh, like that. So you can kind of see him taking that step on that red foot. Then I'm going to try to place the blue foot out in front an equal distance, but with heel roll. And then I'm going to flip back to check the angle, reduce it a little bit, check how straight the leg was, which was a little bit more bent, probably about there. And then if you really want to be careful, you can check the distance apart the legs are. So front leg, translate Z of 7.2, backward negative 7 point something, so that's about 15 units apart. So on this one, the red leg is basically the exact same. So I want to add 15 to that, which is going to be something around 21, 22. There we go. Or 21 point something, so that's perfect. There's our first step. And typically, I won't change pretty much anything on the upper body when I'm doing these first couple of steps. I just want to get the legs first because that's the most important part. There we go. So I'm going to go to another 15 frames, which is going to end up being 40. Let's reduce our timeline down to 40 so I can see everything more clearly. Grab all of my controllers, S to keep selected, and do the same thing. So I want this foot to be in the exact same position, and I want this one to be in front, and I want the entire pose to look exactly like this pose. So what I do in the video is I can take this whole pose, grab each one of my controllers, all the ones that's going to move anyway, wrists, ankles, and root, copy, and paste. There we go. And then because I'm going to line up the feet, I like to deselect and then reselect so that my manipulator comes down here. So here we are on the previous frame. And on the next frame, that blue foot is going to be in the same position. I'm going to drag all those forward and then flip back and forth. So here we've got previous step, next step. And I'm really just looking at the diamond because the foot is changing shape. So I'm going to use the diamond as the thing that I'm staring at. We went just a little bit too far. There we go. About as solid as it needs to be. So now I should have my two steps.
How are you quickly changing between the two steps?
I'm using comma and period. When you have something selected that has keyframes, it will jump to the next keyframe or the previous one. And in traditional animation, this would be called flipping. You'd take your pieces of paper and rapidly flip them back and forth in order to draw your in-betweens or check your keyframes. And it was always considered a better practice than using full playback because you can get a more sort of kinesthetic feel for the changes. Okay, so we got our two steps. At this point, I could start to detail the upper body, but I like to get the cycling working as soon as possible. So I'm going to check the hips, start at 0 in translate Z, which is forward to back. And then by 40, we've traveled 28.654. So I'm going to copy that number. And on the ring on the ground, I'm going to paste that number, translate Z, but I'm going to make it negative. Okay. So it is moved back here by the end of the cycle. And then I'm just going to get rid of this central keyframe for that ring so that we've got this. When you first do this, oftentimes the character will bob a little bit. And that's only because your default tangent handles are easing in and out. And so you just need to go into the graph editor and fix that. So for the ring on the ground, translate Z looks like this right now. Remember, that's the T-pose. We don't have to worry about that. I just want these two to be linear. So we've got a nice constant motion. Then We can do that to the hips as well. Translate Z. We want a nice constant motion here as well. And then the rest of the limbs I don't really care about because we're going to put so much detail into them. It's not really even worth doing. But that's what we got so far. All right, looks really weird, but going well so far. All right, so first pose, second pose, third pose. Cool. So I could start putting the arm positions in already. Oh, did the eyes not follow? Oh, I think I keep forgetting to move those. Yeah, they're supposed to be out here somewhere. And then out here somewhere. There. As long as they float in front of the head the whole time, that's all that really is going to matter. The elbows, I don't remember if I'm using the elbow controllers on this rig or not. No, we're using twist right now, so I don't have to worry about those either. Okay, so if I'm working on the lower body, I'm probably going to put in the passing poses next, which are directly in between our contacts, because this tends to give the strongest sense that the character is walking with the minimal amount of effort. So I'm going to just grab everything except for the ring on the ground, hit S at 17, which is about as close as it needs to be between these two poses, and then make sure that the contacting foot, which is red, is planted flat on the ground. Easy as that. So now I'm going to be far less inclined to move the feet forward and backward because I've got the cycling working. I just want to remember that I placed this foot, it's not moving, and it only appears to move because of the purple circle on the ground. But what's important is that it be planted flat on the ground. For this other one, if you consult the charts that I provide, this one is up in the air, suspended, passing the other foot, and in this case we actually do rotate it and get it to make something like a number 4 with the legs where the shins are crossing over. And then sometimes I make a little toe delay so it looks a bit softer. Then we have to raise the hips so that our supporting leg is generally straight, but I want to also keep the hips in front of the ankle so that we're making forward progress, somewhere like here. So pretty straight on that leg, just in front of the ankle or over the ball of the foot would be another good choice. Let me push it a little bit further, like here. And even a little bit of gentle bend in this supporting leg is okay. Last thing I like to do is to get the hips side to side started. The contact poses generally are going to be somewhat neutral, maybe not entirely, but somewhat. And the passing positions, the weight is going to be over the supporting leg. So I like to move that over at least a bit. You can be pretty generous with this most of the time. More generous than you think, but get it like right over the center of that foot, and it tends to look pretty much correct. That means that this foot that's coming through midair can either be angled outward or inward or left neutral. I sometimes have it angle outward just a little bit to give it a bit more personality. Okay, there we go. And it looks pretty extreme so far. I don't rotate the hips until I'm ready to do the torso, because if you start doing that, then the whole torso bobs side to side and it looks really distracting. So I just leave that neutral until I'm ready to do the upper body. There we go. We've got one step. Now, I'll go ahead and do the other passing position, which is going to be at 32. So again, I check which foot. Actually, did I do the back? Yeah, I did the back foot. Okay. So I want to check which foot is forward. It's the blue one. So the blue one is going to be planted flat on the ground. And the red one is going to be lifted up in the air. Passing the other leg. Hips are now going to be a little bit higher and more forward, just like they were in the other pose. That means this one can come up a little bit higher still with a little bit of toe. And then I want to compare it to my other pose just to see that I'm generally in the ballpark. Okay. And then the amount that I've pushed this over, this is less than in the other pose, so I'm going to push it over a little bit more. And then rotate this just a little bit. Okay, so if I play that, it at least looks like he's walking, even if it is very stiff and not very interesting. But he's now swaying side to side and bobbing up and down just a tiny bit. And the feet look like they're kind of walking through mushy snow. But we've got that general feeling. Okay. So I tend to block in the lower body, at least for all of the poses before I even touch the upper body, because I think of the upper body as being driven by the motion of the hips and the legs. And so I like to see all of that motion in place before I try to do anything up top. It's kind of a reaction to the bottom. So I'd go ahead and put in the down pose somewhere between 10 and 17 as the in-between position. I could pick 13 or 14. I'm going to pick 13 in this case. So again, I'll typically grab all the controllers except for the circle on the ground, hit S, and then the down pose is characterized by the character dropping a bit. Try to be generous here at first as well. I drop them at least a half a head. Maybe a quarter of a head in this case. I mean, he's very lanky and tall. But something significant, something noticeable. The red foot, the forward foot, will be flat at this point. So all we have to do is zero that out. The back foot can be the tricky one. This is the one that's going to be peeled off the ground and almost left the ground at this point. So we want to have toe roll cranked way up. I'm going to get rid of the toe rotation. And the ball roll might be more extreme or might be less depending on what's going on. But just about vertical like this where it's going to leave the ground. The last thing I'll do, referring to those walk charts that I provided, is take a look at the position of the hips forward to backward. Typically in the down position, you're going to have to move the hips significantly forward because this is kind of a moment of catching your inertia. So the character will have been traveling forward more quickly, and now they're about to slow down and go backward. And it ends up making kind of an infinity sideways loop-the-loop with the hips. So he's fallen, and now he's going to catch himself and then progress backward a little bit by the up pose. Okay, so somewhere right about here is going to be okay. Last thing I'll take into consideration is the side to side. I've got my passing position way over here. The down pose is either going to be on the way to that or it's going to be the extreme position of that. I like to make it on the way to it, not the extreme. So a little bit less than the passing.
Okay, I'm gonna have to BRB
Okay.
men's room.
Okay. I think I neglected to put the rotations back on 13. Yeah, I've got a little bit. That's not really a bad thing, but it might cause the foot to lift off the ground prematurely. So I'm going to zero out all those rotations. And then make sure that it's still in the same position on the ground. So it looks like 0.2040 and -7 for 0. And then this one, -7. These all have to stay the same. There we go. Okay. Now I'm looking at the hips and thinking, whoop, I went way too far. Let's bring it back just a bit. And probably now I can increase the toe roll a bit more. There we go. Okay. So now we'll do the up pose, 21. Okay, up pose characterized by the hips raising up and also the supporting foot usually having much more ball roll to lift us up higher, but not lifting off the ground yet, not moving from that position, still locked. Our hips will be slightly over that leg still. And how high can be kind of determined by how straight that leg gets. I like to just barely get it straight because then it eases the transition from bent to straight a little bit more gradually. But that varies by person. And then our blue leg will be suspended in front of the body, somewhat like this, and heading towards the contact, where it will then flop down like this. So I just want to make sure I have no heel roll, no toe. Actually, the toe I do oftentimes want to keep, but it's all done by rotations. There we go. You can see in that step, kind of curving turnaround. And then I do all those same things on the other side. Any questions about that method of blocking? I know I go through it in the video, so I'm not sure if you want to see me do the entire other side of it.
So that entire cycle is about 80 frames?
80? No, 30. So we're animating right now at 30 frames per second, and march time is 2 steps per second. So 1 whole second.
Okay.
I think what you're referring to in the video is the fact that I cycle it 4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once we're done with all of this, the infinity over here in our graph editor, we set it to cycle. So post infinity cycle. And that just means whatever we did, it's going to happen again and again and again. In this case, where I've included the T-pose, it's not cycling very well. So I would need to delete that T-pose in order for this to cycle correctly. But without that, it works perfectly. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So 1 step takes half a second, 15 frames in this case. And 2 steps takes 30 frames. Cool. All right. What are you guys interested in seeing?
I guess it's a question about referencing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like Mixamo?
I'm not familiar with it.
Ooh, okay. It's like a bank of animations that Adobe has.
Oh.
You can just
That's
It's
cool.
mocap stuff that you can plug in.
Cool. Okay.
So I was wondering if and basically, yeah, what it is they have like animation clips that you can apply to models that you plug in and it'll auto rig.
Back.
Okay.
I was wondering if referencing like rigs like this is how you create like basically just animation files.
I don't understand your question.
Yeah, I might be
Like,
phrasing this poorly.
so mocap data is different from animation. It's useful and helpful, but hand animation is what we're doing right here. If I create a cycle, I can use it in a game engine or an animation as a little clip that repeats over and over. Is that what you're asking?
I guess essentially. So like a lot of the times, like you see people will switch models,
Right.
like in games to give characters the animations from each other.
Uh-huh.
So I'm wondering like what kind of file or how that animation is like transferred over.
If I have all the same names and number of bones, then I can take any keyframe data and apply it to something else. So we do have these 2 rigs, and they do have the same rigging. They don't have the same body proportions, though. So applying that animation over directly, in this case, would be a little bit fraught. For instance, she would start taking on the step width of this character if I just copy-pasted it over. There are ways to correct that, like you can scale them, and probably there are programs that have a smarter way to apply that over. But here's the thing about that. That is a production necessity for efficiency, and it is not a beauty thing in animation. For animation beauty, for quality, every character should move uniquely. For production, for volume, you can create a set of animations that's applied universally to as many characters as you want, so long as they're rigged similarly. But that's not going to make them appear better. That's going to make them appear worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the difference is, like, if you think about a really well animated game like Overwatch, for instance, every character has a unique physical presence. Roadhog doesn't move anything like Mercy. How could he? He's giant. He's got a huge stomach. His limbs aren't even in the right spot, right? And then Mercy is this small, petite, almost fairy-like feminine figure. She floats everywhere, right? There's no way that you want to animate those two characters in the same way. You could, but it would be awful. But The Sims is a dollhouse simulator. Every character in The Sims is either a child or an adult, male or female. And so they've got a set of animations which is applied fairly universally, no matter who your sim is. And it's just enough to be satisfying, but at no point do you really have a super characteristic motion for those guys. And you end up feeling that the more that you play a game like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are you just asking how? Because it's just copy paste.
Oh, is it that simple? Yeah, I was
It's-
essentially asking how they do that.
It's literally that simple. So if I turn on the female rig's, hips, and then I just copy everything here, and then I just paste it, then she'll move. Now, what I didn't do, right, was animate this little circle down here, but I could do that as well. Grab his, copy, grab hers, paste. And you could do this to as many objects as you wanted, so long as they're named the same. Now here's the thing. She's now in the exact same position. So all we have to do is offset that. So he's at positive 6.6 something. So I'm going to take her translate X for that and just invert it. Oh, negative positive 8. Why does it say something different? All right, so I'll just make it negative 8 for all these. And then hopefully... Oh, I had the wrong one. Well, now he's on the left and she's on the right, but you get the idea. Unfortunately, all of the proportion changes are gone now. So now her hips are like his hips. So I have to be maybe a little bit more careful than I've been. Let me undo a few times. There we go. So I don't want to just copy paste that entire thing. Really, all I want is the translate Z channel. So I believe that I can copy all the animation from that one channel. See, I don't often like copy paste this way, but I think I can do that. Translate Z. Maybe if I just straight up do that. Let's try it. And then translate Z. See what happens. Oh, it pasted at my cursor, so we don't want that. We want to be at 0, essentially. There. Let's see if that did it. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, it's literally just as easy as copy and paste. You just have to be careful about it, or have a system set up that's smart enough to know the differences in proportion from character to character, so that the amount that they're moving is relative to their body size. But if you're talking about like the horrifying stuff I've seen where like, Genji's animations are applied to Tracer or something, it doesn't really work very often.
I've seen some pretty decent ones.
Sometimes it's passable, sometimes it's a nightmare.
I was imagining that they would use that in production as like a quick way to get the like major motions and then fine tune it.
I guess you could. Generally speaking, no. If you're gonna handcraft an animation, you're just gonna pose everything from scratch because the assumptions of these positions will bleed into the other character. I mean, when I first started talking about the differences between their posture, there were so many differences that why would I want to even start from here? In fact, if I was handed that, I might just initially zero out all the channels and start fresh anyway. I want this character to feel different, unique. So I want to be making conscious decisions as I'm posing them, as opposed to letting some shortcut dictate to me how the character is going to move. So that's sort of the same reasoning behind like having a character template to draw or paint over, which I see a lot online. But the problem is all those characters start looking the same. They all start having the same proportions. And that doesn't make them unique or interesting. That makes sense?
Yeah, I got you.
So if your production calls for it, like we've got 150 characters that need animating slightly different, okay, now you're going to have one base motion and you're just going to change each of the others a little bit because that's way, way too many, right? But if you've got a few unique characters, like for instance, in Breath of the Wild, you've got one character you play for the entire game. Of course, his animations are going to be unique. Cool. All right. So I'm going to undo all that stuff I applied to the female character. There we go. She's back to not moving. All right, do you guys have anything else you want me to talk about or describe or demonstrate?
Have you demonstrated the girl yet?
No, but it's all the same steps.
Oh, right. You haven't done it.
I mean, if you want me to, it's just kind of boring because I go through positioning, the hips and the feet, making sure that they're stepping forward, holding still, rotating from the ball. All the same steps except for applied differently because her posture is slightly different, her gait is slightly different. All of the real animation happens after you have these poses. Once you have these poses in place, then you can give it nuance. Then you can decide the place that I put this is not going to create a fluid motion. So let me do this. I'm going to save this one. Let me open up my demo walk file because that one's much more progressed. So here's my demo walk file. This guy has a bit more personality, even though I was trying to eliminate personality. And I could start to do things with the amount of keyframes I have now, the working keyframes, in order to give him a different feeling. So how about we mess around with him a little bit and see what happens if I start changing things. So I'm going to save as just a different file. Let's take, for instance, his feet and have them swinging outward each step. So here they're lifting off the ground. They come out here. Let's have them go way out here instead. Which is going to look pretty odd. Okay? But instead of what he's doing with his hips, which is relatively tame, let's have him sort of swinging his whole body around as he's taking those steps. So I'm going to have him lean his body over to this side, bring him back just a little bit. I'm going to have him come up to more neutral on this contact and have him remain slightly over while he's bringing his foot over. There, he sets it down. His contact's a bit more neutral. So I'm going to make this contact a bit more neutral, which I'm going to have to duplicate over here. For now, I'll just eyeball it, but at the end of this, I'd probably copy and paste. Okay, and now since he's stepping, I'm going to bring that over and start getting his suspended foot way out, just like I did on the other side. I don't think I actually did it for that one. Oh, because that's the one where he's peeling off the ground, so maybe I don't want to do that one. This one. All right, so let me move translate x back. It was just 0, so that's fine. So doing something like this, it's covered in the Animator Survival Guide, by the way, as a way to start messing around with the character, get them a different personality. And it can be really interesting, but it's better if it's motivated from some idea of who this person is. Like a cowboy or something might do a big, wide, exaggerated, arcing step like this. Or sailor. Or just someone being a clown. All right, so let's see the hips. This one starts to tip, tips a lot, comes back to somewhat neutral. Okay, so with just those changes, now he's walking like that. Maybe like he's crapped his pants, or maybe like he's been on a ship and he's still got sea legs or something. But we can continue to exaggerate this until we've got a real character walk. So now, looking at that, I start to think, oh, that's interesting. His upper body's not doing very much interesting stuff because all I've done is tip him at the waist. But now I feel like I almost want him to be crab walking the whole time. Instead of these straight contacted legs, I feel like I want his knees to kind of be bent all the time. I'm going to bring him down a little bit on both his contacts. I'm going to bring him down further on his down pose. Passing pose seems fine. And his up pose is the one time that he might get close to straight, but I think that's far enough. He's still got a bent leg. Okay. It's almost like he's got wet pants or something. So I'm liking that. Then I could do things like, instead of his feet facing forward, since we've got this kind of duck walk, I could have them facing outward all the time, sort of angled towards the left and the right. So we could do that by either rotating here, or since this character has it, I can use pivot. Pivot is a nice gentle way to angle the foot without really moving its position. I do have to offset this though, because the pivot placed the toe further out. And at this point, you know what? I think I actually would still be pivoting. Let's not move that. Let's pivot like that. And by this point, the pivot's gone. Okay. And let's see for the placement. So for here, I'm going to reintroduce that pivot. Looks like it's really moving the heel position. And however much pivot I had, I want it to be the same. So maybe slightly less. Yeah, I'm going to slightly less than that. We'll keep it at, put 12 even. It's a nice number to keep track of. Then towards the end here, it will start to straighten out right before the liftoff. So at this point, we could have 9 or 8 or something. So let's reduce that. Okay, so now he's got this outward angle to that foot. I can do the same thing for the other foot. Now, really, I wouldn't just be doing this willy-nilly with a rig. I would be doing this with my body in the real world, right? I would be standing up, walking across the room, acting it out, and then trying to figure out what is it that I'm doing that I like about this acting. And then I would be applying it to the rig. You can do it this way, especially if you're really confident in the way that you're editing it, but that's not typically the way it would go. Oh, I had rotated it right up in the air. No wonder it looked weird. Okay, so let's just rotate and move. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. That's why. I need to be here. And this one. Yeah. Okay. Kind of interesting. I think I could continue lowering his body overall. This is a place where I could just grab the actual graph editor and just move things around to see how it changes. Don't know what happened to the tangent handle there. Got really crazy. Okay, so right now he's walking like this. And instead, he could be walking like this. Kind of like it. I sort of want his knees out too. Right now his knees aren't doing that. So I could, I guess, just grab translate X for these knees. But I don't know if I've already changed it somewhere. Yeah, it looks like I did already change it somewhere. So let's just scale towards that new position. So now the rest of them are closer. There we go. That helped a little. So then I could do the same thing with this other leg. I don't think I changed this one at all. Well, maybe I did. Oh yeah, I did. So let's scale it towards that new position. I do want the start and end to line up. Right now they don't. Okay. There we go. And so then I'd start getting the arms into the act as well. Instead of doing what they're currently doing, I could completely change it or slightly change it. I think he should have like Popeye arm positions. Elbows up, arms almost straight out and down with kind of like balled fists like this. And then that ends up changing it so much that I maybe can't even use any of this animation I've got. Where's the thumb? There's the thumb. I think I rolled it too far and spread it too far. There we go. That's a bit better. I might be able to completely copy this to the other hand because the hand controls I think are identical. Yeah. Oh, except for the thumb roll that's gone the wrong way. Or the thumb spread. I forget which one that is. Thumb roll. Thumb roll went the opposite way, but every other part of the controller of the hand was the same. So I can just delete these. There we go. So we got a balled fist the whole time now. What I'm looking to do is kind of create this tough guy kind of pose where he's just holding them out like that the entire time. Now, I haven't done anything to the upper body yet, but that's sort of funny that he's so stiff in that upper body. So I could just try out like holding the arms way out there. I do have a bunch of other keyframes that I don't need, whoops, because they were a part of the polishing pass before. I'm just going to delete them. And yeah, I mean, there's so much motion here that I kind of just want to delete everything except for the context and start over with the arms because I think it'll be faster. And oftentimes I won't be too careful about this at first because there's a really good chance that I'm going to change something pretty significant. So I'll just get it close enough. And if there's glitching, I just don't care until later on in the animation process. So this one's the one that's behind. So I'm going to make sure that the fist is still rotated fairly forward. Okay, so now the most significant part is that he takes this big looping detour by the passing position. So okay, and I gotta use the elbow rotate, elbow twist to keep it out there. I think the other one's 22. Yeah. Okay, let's see. So we ignore half the body. He's got this kind of tough guy walk or something. Like over exaggerated tough guy or sailor walk. So this is really at the point where all the personality can enter in. I wouldn't do any polishing if I was still working on this personality. I would just leave it those primary poses, but I would change them such that I'm starting to get the personality and aspect that I want from this character, and then I'd worry about polishing after that. Cool?
Cool.
Cool. And sky's the limit. People can walk in all sorts of different ways. We're really, really good at it, and so personality can have a huge impact. And you don't necessarily have to do those primary poses every time. It's a really good idea because fundamentally what's happening is that you're throwing off your balance and catching it. But you don't have to. You can do the opposite sometimes. Instead of down, you can go up. You can hold the hips perfectly steady. There's a lot of really great cartoon walks that do exactly those things. It's harder with a 3D model because it feels more physical and real, but it's definitely not impossible. Thinking a couple other things I would do is maybe lean the entire body back for the whole duration of the walk, or lean the entire body really far forward for the whole duration of the walk. Let's try backward. I'm going to rotate him. Which direction is that? That is X. Rotate X. So I'm going to grab the whole line, move it. Oh, there we go. This way. About there. And then I'm going to try to also position him so that he's always over his back foot instead of in the middle of them. So here's translate Z. And I'm trying to think, when is the right time to do this? I think the contacts, I want the contacts to be fairly straight-legged on the front part. So I'm going to just move it here. Okay, just like that. So yeah, we'll have him, how far? About here or so. And just see how that... I like it more and more. And then we can do the same thing with the wrist to keep it relative to the torso. Move it back. And then something would be called for now in the chest. I don't think I could really keep bending the chest back like that. I'd probably have to curl it forward somewhat. But he's just looking very silly. And very fun. So then the big task after this kind of expressionistic, fun, exaggerated pass would be trying to make this plausible. Not look so stupid and to actually look like someone could possibly do it. Which would mean, toning it down just a little bit or fine-tuning the mechanics or trying to act this out on camera and seeing what my real human body does sometimes. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay.
Anything else?
Just an idea popped into my head.
Mhm.
You know how in RPGs you can customize your character and stuff?
Yeah.
Would it be possible to program it so that you can give your character a personality, and based on that personality, they do their walk animation will change depending on the personality you choose?
Yeah, absolutely. Both Red Dead Online and GTA have presets that you can pick. So you can make your character walk like a tough guy or walk like a gentleman or whatever. And so I don't know how many of their other animations are affected, but it's kind of down to how much the studio wants to pay for additional animation. So for instance, if you were just pulling out or holstering your weapon, that choice could change your holstering or pulling out of your weapon animation, or not. It could just be layered on top of the character for the walk. So there could be a singular animation for pulling out a weapon and no animation for idle. It's those personality choices. So the two are layered on top of each other, and now you've got this combination. This is something that we're kind of play with in the next assignment, where we're going to animate the character doing something with their upper body and also doing something with their lower body. We're going to blend those together in Unity so that you can have, for instance, like aiming a gun and walking, aiming a gun and standing still, firing a gun and walking, firing a gun and standing still, that sort of thing.
Cool.
So that would be called animation blending. All right, you guys. Then I think that's it for now. Good luck on the walk cycle. Hope it goes well. If not, send me messages if you get stuck. Hopefully there's enough lecture there, because a 3-hour lecture is pretty freaking big. Yeah. But do a good job on it. Try to carefully move through it. Should go all right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Tabor.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.